Okay, let's jump right into this explainer by busting the two biggest myths about poetry right out of the gate. So often we approach a poem thinking it's some sort of strict, unbreakable riddle. But let's look at the actual facts here. First, a poem absolutely does not have to rhyme. Seriously? In fact, tons of poems use free verse or open forms that are heavily influenced by the natural, everyday rhythms of speech. And second, perhaps the biggest myth of all, a poem is not a rigid puzzle with a single, hidden, correct meaning waiting to be unlocked by an expert. Nope. Instead, multiple interpretations are completely valid, provided you can actually support them with evidence from the text itself. So, welcome to today's explainer, designed specifically for you, our grade 8 English readers. Today, we're going to learn how to approach a poem like a detective, building a rock-solid case. We're going to figure out exactly how you can uncover the layers of a poem by paying close attention to the deliberate clues the author leaves behind, from their specific word choices to the very structure of the text on the page. But before we begin our investigation, we really need to understand that reading poetry requires a completely different strategy than reading prose. When you read a standard novel or an informational article, you're reading prose. It's written in standard sentences and paragraphs, usually with a pretty literal focus, so you can quickly grab the main idea and move on. Poetry, though, it operates totally differently. It relies on lines and stanzas. It places a huge emphasis on figurative language, rhythm, and sound to convey emotion and mood. Because it's so incredibly compressed, poetry demands that we slow down and read closely, multiple times. Here is our roadmap for today. First, poetry, myths, and prose. Second, our first read for the gist. Third, our second read for craft. Fourth, our third read for deeper meaning, and finally, we'll wrap up with a recap and a transfer task. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Poetry, Myths, and Prose, setting the stage. To really get the hang of this, we're going to use a created practice poem today. Notice how short this is? It's just 4 lines, but as you're about to see, there is a massive amount of deliberate craft packed into this tiny little space. Moving right along to Section 2, the first read, where we look for the gist. You know, whenever you encounter a new poem, you should never expect to understand all its deep themes instantly. As readers, we just can't expect to get the whole shebang right away. So, like a good detective, we're going to break our investigation down into 3 sweeps, starting on the surface, looking at how it's built, and then diving underneath. During this very first sweep, our first read, we are just looking for the gist. We literally just want the literal meaning. Who is the speaker, meaning the voice of the poem, and what exactly is the situation? If we look back at our practice poem, the literal situation is super simple. An observer, our speaker, is looking at a freezing winter tree and noticing that, despite the freezing cold, there are green buds waiting right underneath the ice. That's it. That's our foundation. Okay, part 3, the second read, focusing on the craft. This is where we peel back a layer and look closely at how the poet actually built the thing. First up, we can see the poem's unique form by looking at its structure. A line is the fundamental unit of poetry, carrying meaning both horizontally and vertically. A stanza is just a grouping of those lines. Our practice poem is built using 4 individual lines grouped together into a single stanza. And this is key. The poet chose to break those lines exactly where they did to force us to pause and reflect on each specific image. That is something you just don't get in a standard paragraph. Next, we've got to examine the poet's diction and imagery. Diction is just a fancy word for specific word choice. Imagery is language that represents a sensory experience, so visual, auditory, tactile. In our poem, the poet didn't just say, "it is cold." No way. They used the diction bites to give the chill a tactile, aggressive feeling. They described a silver tree and a frozen crust. These aren't accidental choices, guys. They are carefully selected to build a really vivid picture in your mind. But wait. Poets also play heavily with sound devices to convey emotion and tone. You've got alliteration, which is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginnings of words. You have assonance, the repetition of internal vowel sounds, and consonance, the repetition of consonant sounds, often tucked at the ends of words. Think of these sonic choices like the musical score to a movie. They literally tell you how to feel while you read. All right, time for our first pause check. I want to test your detective skills right now. Pause the explainer, look closely at the repetition in line 2, a silent, sleeping, silver tree. Can you determine which specific sound device is at work here? Did you catch it? The answer is alliteration. By deliberately repeating that soft starting S sound in silent, sleeping, and silver, The poet perfectly mimics the quiet, peaceful feeling of a snowy winter day. The actual sound of the words physically supports the meaning of the words. I mean, how cool is that? That is the magic of poetic craft.
And that brings us to section 4, the third read, where we put it all together to build the meaning.
We are now officially hunting for figurative meaning. This means we're exploring the associative or connotative meaning of a poem. We have to ask ourselves, what deeper themes, ideas, or human concepts might these literal images of a winter tree actually represent? So, here is our second pause check. The poem concludes with the line, "Green buds wait patiently." Pause the explainer for a second and think about what human emotion this personification might symbolize. How does a tree, enduring a harsh winter, connect to the human experience? If you guessed hope and resilience, you hit the nail right on the head. Let's look at the textual evidence to back that up. Green buds act as a symbol for new life and future growth. By saying they wait patiently, the poet uses personification to show the tree enduring a really difficult, freezing time. Therefore, our final supported interpretation is that this poem is actually about human resilience, the idea that even in our darkest, coldest, and most difficult seasons of life, there is potential for new life and growth waiting just beneath the surface. And notice, we didn't just guess that meaning, we built it from the ground up using clues from our 3 reads. Finally, section 5, our recap and transfer task. Let's apply your new skills. Let's lock this in with a quick 3-point recap to summarize exactly how we can confidently analyze poetry. Point 1. Poetry uses unique structures like lines and stanzas, along with sound and imagery, to convey deep meaning incredibly efficiently. Point 2. By reading a poem multiple times for gist, craft, and meaning, we can uncover these layers just like a detective. And point 3, never forget this one. There is no single hidden answer, only interpretations supported by textual evidence. So I leave you with this final transfer task to practice your new skills out in the wild. Go find a new authorized poem, maybe something by Emily Dickinson, Langston Hughes, or a modern favorite of yours. Can you annotate its sound devices, its imagery, and its structure? And more importantly, can you use that evidence to logically support your own unique interpretation? Be the detective. The evidence is right there on the page, waiting for you to find it. Ask yourself this. Once you realize every single word in a poem is a deliberate clue, how will that change the way you read everything else in your world?